Imagine you could talk to someone who lived 300,000 years ago, not a primitive, not a caveman grunt, a fully modern human, with your brain, your capacity for love, your ability to feel heartbreak and joy and wonder. You sit down with them and you ask, "What do you do every single night without fail?" And they look at you like the answer is obvious, like asking a fish what it does in water. Because for them, like every human before you, there was only one answer. They gathered, they made fire, they sat together in the dark, and they told stories until sleep took them. Every single night. Your great-great-grandmother did it, the pharaohs of Egypt did it, the warriors of ancient Greece, the nomads of the Mongolian steppe, the first humans who ever looked up at the Milky Way and tried to make sense of what they saw, they all did it. And then in the span of a single generation, roughly 100 years ago, we stopped. Not because a doctor told us to, not because science recommended it, not because we evolved past it. We stopped because of a glass bulb and a thin strand of glowing wire, and in the century since, something has gone quietly, catastrophically wrong with the human mind. Depression has tripled. Anxiety disorders now affect 1 in 3 adults in the developed world. Loneliness has been declared a global epidemic by the World Health Organization. Suicide rates among young people are at historic highs. Chronic inflammation, the biological marker of long-term stress, is present in the majority of adults over 40. And the most disturbing part? We have no single explanation, no clear villain, no obvious cause. What if the answer has been burning in front of us the entire time? What if the thing we lost, that ancient, universal, 300,000-year-old human practice, was not a ritual, not a tradition, not a cultural habit? What if it was medicine? Today, the science is finally catching up. And what researchers are finding is more profound and more actionable than anyone expected. This is that story. To understand what we lost, we have to genuinely go back, not as a metaphor, literally. Picture the African savanna, roughly 300,000 years ago. The sun drops below the horizon, and unlike every other creature on Earth, early Homo sapiens do something remarkable. They don't scatter. They don't retreat into individual burrows or trees. They come together, around fire. Now here's what most people don't realize. Fire didn't just protect early humans from predators. That was almost secondary. What fire actually did, what it uniquely, specifically, biologically did, was extend the day. Before fire, the social lives of our primate ancestors ended at sunset. Darkness meant danger. Darkness meant silence. Darkness meant sleep. Fire shattered that boundary. Suddenly, humans had 3 to 4 extra hours every single night, hours of warmth, light, and safety that no other animal on Earth possessed. And what did they do with those hours? Dr. Polly Wiessner, an anthropologist at the University of Utah, spent decades living with the Juhowansi San people of the Kalahari Desert, one of the oldest continuous cultures on the planet, with a way of life that has remained largely unchanged for tens of thousands of years. She sat with them, day and night, recording conversations, analyzing what people talked about and when. What she found was so striking it reframed how scientists think about human evolution. During the day, conversations were overwhelmingly practical. Where is the water? Who will hunt where? What plants did you find? Task-oriented, resource-focused, short. But at night, around the fire, everything changed. Daytime conversation was about logistics. Nighttime conversation was about life. 81% of firelight conversation was devoted to storytelling. Not gossip, not planning, stories. Narratives with characters and conflict and resolution. Stories about animals with human qualities. Stories about ancestors who faced impossible odds. Stories about the spirit world, about love and betrayal, about what it means to be a good person or a terrible one. Dr. Wiessner concluded, and this is the part that should stop you cold, that firelight storytelling was the primary mechanism through which human values, ethics, identity, and social norms were transmitted across generations. Not schools, not books, not governments, not churches. Fire. The campfire was the original university, the original parliament, the original therapy session, the original church. It was where children learned who they were, where adults processed the weight of being alive, where the elderly passed down everything that mattered before they were gone. And we didn't phase it out gradually. We didn't replace it with something equivalent. We flipped a switch. And 300,000 years of human practice went dark in a single generation. Dr. Wiessner put it this way: firelight opened up the night and a new time for the imagination. When we turned on the lights, we turned off the imagination. And we are only now beginning to understand the full cost of that trade. Let me take you inside the neuroscience, because this is where the story gets extraordinary. Your brain did not evolve in fluorescent offices or LED-lit bedrooms. It evolved over 300,000 years in a world where the only light after dark was fire. And that fact, that seemingly simple, obvious fact, has neurological consequences that most people have never considered. Dr. Christopher Lynn is an anthropologist and professor at the University of Alabama who became obsessed with a question that most scientists ignored. What does fire actually do to the human nervous system? In 2014, he ran a study that was deceptively simple. He brought participants into a controlled environment. He measured their blood pressure before the session began. Then he exposed them to a flickering fire, real wood, real flame, for varying amounts of time. And he measured their blood pressure again. The results were immediate and striking. Blood pressure dropped, consistently, measurably. The longer participants sat with fire, the greater the drop. Then he ran the control. Same participants, same room, same duration. But this time, no fire, just standard electric light. The relaxation effect disappeared almost entirely. He published his findings and concluded that humans have what he called a hearth hypothesis, the idea that our nervous systems are biologically calibrated to respond to fire as a primary signal of safety and social belonging. But here's what makes this even more fascinating. It's not just fire generically. It's the specific, particular flicker of an open flame. Mathematicians and physicists describe the flickering pattern of fire as what's called 1/F noise, a pattern of variation that is neither perfectly regular nor completely random, but somewhere beautifully in between. It's the same pattern found in ocean waves, in birdsong, in the human heartbeat, in music that moves us. And here's the connection that changes everything. 1/F noise is the exact pattern of your brain's own electrical activity during what neuroscientists call the default mode network, or DMN. The default mode network is one of the most important and least understood systems in your brain. It activates not when you're focused on a task, but when you're not, when you're drifting, daydreaming, letting the mind wander. And what does the default mode network actually do in those moments? It processes identity, it integrates memories, it generates empathy. It constructs the narrative of your life, the story you tell yourself about who you are and what your life means. It is, in the most literal neurological sense, the part of your brain that makes you you. And it runs on the same frequency as firelight. Your ancient ancestors sitting around the fire every night were not just warming their bodies. They were entraining their brains, synchronizing their neural oscillations with the rhythm of the flame, and dropping into the exact neurological state required for the deepest human cognitive work. Processing grief, rebuilding identity after failure, integrating trauma into narrative, generating compassion for others. The fire wasn't just the setting, the fire was the mechanism. And then consider what we replaced it with. Your smartphone screen, your LED television, your fluorescent office light. These sources emit what's called blue spectrum light, short wavelength, high energy, biologically potent. And your brain has a specific receptor, the IPRGC, or intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cell, that is maximally sensitive to exactly this wavelength. When these cells detect blue light, they send a signal to your suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock of your circadian system, and tell it, it is midday. The sun is high. Do not sleep. Stay alert. Stay stressed. Your phone at 10 p.m. is telling your ancient brain it is noon, and your ancient brain believes it. Dr. Charles Czeisler at Harvard Medical School, one of the world's foremost authorities on circadian biology, has documented that evening exposure to LED screens delays the onset of melatonin production by an average of 90 minutes. It reduces total melatonin output by up to 50%, and it suppresses the slow wave and REM sleep stages that are essential for emotional regulation, immune function, memory consolidation, and metabolic health. Your ancestors sat by firelight, warm, amber, flickering at 1/F, their brains down-regulated gently into the night. You sit by a screen, blue, steady, biologically screaming noon, and then you wonder why you can't sleep, why you feel anxious, why you wake at 3 a.m. with a mind that won't stop. This is not a personal failure. This is a species-level mismatch between the environment your brain was built for and the environment you actually live in. And the gap, if we're being precise, is exactly 100 years old. Let me show you something, a timeline, not of history generally, of a very specific unraveling. 1879. Thomas Edison demonstrates the first practical incandescent light bulb. He calls it the great benefactor of humanity. No one disagrees. Light is progress. Light is civilization. 1900. The first large-scale electric grids begin supplying power to homes in major American and European cities. Nighttime changes. Gradually, then suddenly. 1910. The first documented studies of what physicians call nervous exhaustion begin appearing in medical literature. A cluster of symptoms including insomnia, irritability, inability to concentrate, and pervasive anxiety. Doctors call it neurasthenia. They blame modernity generally. They don't look at the light. 1930. Radio brings a new kind of passive entertainment into the home. For the first time in history, families stop talking to each other in the evening and start listening to strangers instead. 1950. Television arrives. Within a decade, it occupies the center of the American living room, the exact spot where, for all of human history, the hearth had stood. The fire is replaced by a glowing screen. Families still gather, but they no longer face each other, they face the wall. 1955. Tranquilizers, specifically meprobamate, sold as Milltown, become the first psychiatric drugs to be prescribed at massive scale. Within 2 years, 36 million prescriptions are written. Doctors joke that they should put it in the water supply. 1980. Personal computers enter homes. Screen time begins its exponential ascent. 1997. The first smartphones arrive. Light is now personal, portable, and inescapable. 2012. Researchers at UC San Diego published data showing that face-to-face social interaction among Americans has declined by 30% since 1980. They note carefully that the decline exactly mirrors the rise of screen time. 2017. Psychologist Jean Twenge publishes data showing a dramatic increase in adolescent depression, anxiety, loneliness, and suicide ideation beginning precisely in 2012. The year smartphone ownership crossed 50% among American teenagers. 2023. The World Health Organization declares loneliness a global public health epidemic. The U.S. Surgeon General issues a formal advisory on the loneliness crisis, comparing its health effects to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Now, look at that timeline again. Every single inflection point, every acceleration in mental health decline, in social fragmentation, in anxiety and isolation, corresponds to a technology that replaced direct human connection with mediated, screen-based experience. And every single one of those technologies delivered light into the darkness. The very thing we thought we were gaining, illumination, knowledge, connection, entertainment, may have been costing us the one thing we cannot actually function without: the regulated nervous system, the told story, the shared silence around the fire. Let me be precise about what I'm not saying. I'm not saying technology is evil. I'm not saying we should go back to the Stone Age. I'm not making a simple causal argument that screens cause depression. I'm saying something more nuanced and more disturbing, that we replaced a 300,000-year-old biological need with something that has never, not once, not in any controlled study, been shown to adequately substitute for it. And the body is keeping score. I want to stop here, and I want to go deeper than the science for a moment, because there is something about the firelight ritual that the data captures imperfectly. Something that I think matters more than blood pressure readings and melatonin levels and circadian rhythms. I want to talk about what it actually felt like to be human around a fire, and why your brain is still, at this very moment, hungry for it. Close your eyes for a second. Imagine it. You've had a hard day, your body is tired, the sun is gone, the darkness around you is absolute. Not the gentle urban darkness of a bedroom with light bleeding under the door, but real darkness, unbroken, in every direction. And then there is the fire, warm, crackling, alive. The light moves, it never holds still, and in that movement, something in your nervous system releases. The constant scanning stops. The threat assessment quiets. The part of your brain that has been saying, be ready, be ready, be ready all day long, rests. And then someone starts talking. Maybe it's an elder. Maybe it's the best storyteller in the group. The one whose voice has a particular quality, who knows how to pause at exactly the right moment, who can make you feel the cold of the mountain even when you're warm by the fire. And they begin. A story. Not a report. Not an instruction manual. Not a list of facts. A story. With a character who is real, or who feels real, and who wants something desperately, and who faces something terrifying, and who does not know if they will survive. And here is the neuroscience of what happens to you in that moment. Dr. Uri Hassan, a neuroscientist at Princeton, ran an experiment that transformed how scientists understand human communication. He placed both storytellers and listeners in fMRI machines and measured their brain activity in real time during the telling and receiving of stories. What he found was not what anyone expected. When a story was told with genuine emotional engagement, the listener's brain did not simply process the information passively. The listener's brain began to mirror the speaker's brain, region by region, moment by moment. The neural patterns of the storyteller literally reproduced themselves in the listener. Hassan called this neural coupling, and he found that the stronger the neural coupling, the more closely the listener's brain matched the speaker's, the better the listener's comprehension, retention, and emotional response. In other words, great stories don't just inform, they synchronize minds. And now think about what this means around a fire. 10 people, 15 people, a small tribe huddled in the dark, and one voice telling a story that everyone in that circle has chosen to attend to, fully, with their whole mind. Those 10 minds were literally synchronizing, like tuning forks held close together, like musicians finding the same key. This is how values were transmitted without being lectured. You don't tell someone to be brave. You tell them the story of the ancestor who was afraid and chose to act anyway, and what happened after. And their brain lives that story as if they were there. This is how trauma was metabolized without being diagnosed. You don't process grief by thinking about it logically. You process it by putting it into narrative form, giving it a beginning, a middle, an end. And you tell it, and someone else receives it. And in that receiving, the isolation of pain becomes something shared. This is how communities stayed together through impossible hardship, not through policies or laws or contracts, through stories that reminded everyone, every night, of who they were, what they stood for, and why the person beside them was worth protecting. Every culture on Earth developed this, independently, universally. The Norse had their sagas, the Yoruba had their griot tradition, the Aboriginal Australians had the Dreamtime stories. Narratives so old, so precisely told, that geologists have recently confirmed they accurately describe volcanic events that occurred 37,000 years ago. 37,000 years, passed down in story, without writing, without technology, without anything except a fire and a human voice. And now, we watch Netflix. I want to be fair here. Film and television and books, these are legitimate art forms. They carry stories, they create neural coupling, they can move us and change us. But there is a difference, a fundamental neurological difference, between receiving a story that someone else created, packaged, and delivered to you through a screen, and sitting across from a real human being in real time and listening to their voice tell you something true about their life. The fMRI doesn't lie. Mediated stories produce coupling. But live, direct, face-to-face storytelling produces coupling that is faster, deeper, more emotionally resonant, and longer lasting. Your brain knows the difference between a performance and a presence. And every night that you watch something instead of talking to someone, you are choosing the performance. You are skipping the presence. And your nervous system, 300,000 years old and still waiting for the fire, registers the difference. Even if you don't consciously know why you feel slightly hollow, slightly disconnected, slightly less than fully alive, the hunger you feel, that low-grade social hunger that no amount of scrolling quite satisfies, has a name. It's called mammalian belonging. And it was fed for all of human history by exactly one thing: a fire, a circle, a story, in the dark. Let me tell you about some casualties that nobody talks about. Not deaths, not disasters, quiet losses. Things that have been disappearing so gradually for so long that most people don't even notice they're gone. The first casualty, deep rest. Dr. Roger Ekirch is a historian at Virginia Tech who spent 16 years researching what he calls the forgotten history of sleep. His findings, published in the groundbreaking book, At Day's Close, Night in Times Past, revealed something extraordinary. For most of human history, people did not sleep in one continuous block the way we are told to today. They slept in two distinct phases, separated by an hour or two of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night. This middle-of-the-night waking, called the watch, was not insomnia. It was a recognized, celebrated time. People used it to pray, to think, to have quiet conversations with a partner, to process dreams, to simply exist in a state of reflective half-consciousness that felt, by historical accounts, deeply peaceful. References to this first sleep and second sleep appear throughout pre-industrial literature, in Chaucer, in Shakespeare, in medical texts from the 16th and 17th centuries. And then, in the late 19th century, as artificial light extended the evening and compressed sleep into a single block, the first sleep and second sleep merged. The watch disappeared, and with it, that particular quality of nighttime contemplation. Today, waking in the middle of the night is classified as a sleep disorder. We treat it with medication. We call it a problem. But Dr. Ekirch's research suggests it may be the most natural thing a human can do, and that by suppressing it, we may be suppressing a form of rest and reflection that our ancestors considered essential. The second casualty, narrative identity. Psychologist Dan McAdams at Northwestern University has spent decades studying what he calls narrative identity, the story we construct about ourselves and our lives that gives us a sense of continuity, meaning, and purpose. His research shows that strong narrative identity, a clear, coherent, evolving story of who you are and where you're going, is one of the most powerful predictors of psychological well-being ever discovered. More predictive than income, more predictive than relationship status, more predictive than physical health. And how do humans build narrative identity? By telling stories about themselves, by having those stories received and reflected back by others, by listening to stories that help them understand their own experience. This was the nightly work of the fire circle. When the elder told a story about the hunter who lost everything and found his way back, every person in that circle was mapping that story onto their own life, finding themselves in it, building their narrative. Today, most adults in the developed world have almost no regular context for this kind of storytelling. Dinner is quick, evenings are screens, deep conversation is reserved for crisis, therapy, funerals, the occasional moment of vulnerability that we apologize for almost immediately. We are narratively starved, and the cost is a pervasive sense of meaninglessness that no productivity hack, no self-help book, no wellness app has been able to adequately address. The third casualty, intergenerational knowledge. For 300,000 years, the wisdom of the old was transmitted to the young through story. Every night, without exception, the elder who had survived famine and war and grief and loss sat by the fire and told the young what they knew, not as a lecture, as a story. And the young listened, because the fire held them, because the darkness made the voice feel important, because there was nothing else competing for their attention. Today, the average American adult spends approximately 11 hours per day interacting with screens. The average American teenager spends roughly 7 to 9 hours. And the average time spent in meaningful face-to-face intergenerational conversation, the research suggests, is less than 10 minutes per day. 10 minutes. Against 11 hours of screens. Something has inverted. Something has gone profoundly, quietly wrong. And we keep treating the symptoms, the anxiety, the depression, the loneliness, the meaninglessness, without ever asking whether we've simply destroyed the practice that prevented those symptoms for 300,000 years. So, what do we actually do? Because everything I've described so far is, in one sense, just a very long way of saying the old ways mattered, the fire mattered, the stories mattered, the gathering in the dark mattered. But we can't unknow electricity. We can't uninvent the smartphone. And I'm not asking you to. What I am asking you to do is something much more precise, much more specific, and, based on the research, much more powerful than most wellness interventions you've ever tried. Practice 1. Reclaim the evening light. The 90 minutes before you sleep is, neurologically speaking, the most important window of your day. It is when your circadian system shifts from alert to rest, when your cortisol drops, when your melatonin rises, when your brain begins the process of emotional consolidation that will determine, more than almost anything else, how you feel tomorrow. Your ancestors ran this process on firelight, warm, amber, low intensity, flickering at 1+F. The intervention is almost embarrassingly simple. In the evening, turn off overhead lights, light candles, real candles, the flicker matters. Dr. Lin's research confirms that even candle exposure produces measurable physiological relaxation. Your phone emits the equivalent of midday sun. A candle tells your nervous system, it is safe, it is night, you can rest. Do this for 2 weeks, track how you feel. The research is remarkably consistent. Most people report better sleep, reduced anxiety, and a notable improvement in morning mood within 10 to 14 days. Practice 2. Have a fire conversation. Once a week or once a month, if weekly feels impossible, gather with people you love or trust. It doesn't need to be large. 2 people is enough. 3 is a fire circle. And use this question: what's a story from your life that you think about more than people would expect? That question is carefully designed. It bypasses small talk, it bypasses performance. It asks for something real, something with narrative weight, without demanding vulnerability outright. When someone answers it honestly, you will feel something shift in the room. Because what you are doing neurologically is initiating neural coupling. You are offering your brain and their brain the opportunity to synchronize around a real human story. This is what the fire circle was for. And two people in a quiet room with real attention, that is a fire circle. Practice 3, protect silence. Your default mode network, the part of your brain that processes identity, empathy, and meaning, requires unstructured downtime to do its work. It cannot run while you are scrolling. It cannot run while you are watching. It requires you to do, functionally, nothing. Your ancestors had this built into every evening. The hours around the fire were not optimized. They were not productive. They were simply present. And in that presence, the brain did its most important work. Build 20 minutes of genuine silence into your day. No input, no podcast, no background music, just you and your mind, and ideally, a candle. If this feels unbearable, that is diagnostic information. It means your nervous system has forgotten how to rest. And the fact that stillness feels impossible is precisely why it has become essential. Practice 4, tell your story. Not to an audience, not on social media, not for likes or views, to one person who is present, who is listening. Tell them something true about your life, a struggle, a failure, a moment that changed you. Not because it will impress them, because the telling of it, the act of constructing it into narrative and releasing it into the air, is one of the oldest and most powerful forms of psychological processing ever discovered. Dr. James Pennebaker at the University of Texas has spent 40 years studying the health effects of expressive writing and storytelling. His findings are unambiguous. The regular narration of difficult experience, putting it into story form and sharing it, produces measurable improvements in immune function, cardiovascular health, psychological well-being, and even longevity. Your ancestors did this every single night. They didn't call it therapy, they called it sitting by the fire. It was the same thing. I want to end where we began, 300,000 years. Think about how long that is. Every human being who ever loved someone, every mother who ever held a sick child through the night, every person who ever lost someone and didn't know how to keep going, every young person who ever sat on the edge of adulthood, terrified and thrilled, every old person who ever looked at the years behind them and tried to find the thread of meaning running through it all. Every single one of them did this. Every night. They gathered, they made fire, they looked at each other across the flame, and they spoke in the particular irreplaceable way that human beings speak when the darkness is real and the light is warm and the people around them are present. And then one generation decided it was unnecessary, decided the light bulb was enough, the television was enough, the algorithm was enough. We are the first humans in 300,000 years who regularly sit alone in the dark, bathed in blue light, consuming content produced by strangers, and call that an evening. And we are paying for it, quietly, steadily, in anxiety and loneliness and the strange modern feeling that something is missing, something is slightly wrong, something that you can't quite name is not the way it's supposed to be. You're right, something is wrong. You are right to feel it. But here is what I need you to hear. The ritual is not gone. It is waiting. Your nervous system, 300,000 years old, infinitely patient, built for fire and darkness and human voices, still knows exactly what to do. The circuitry is intact. The hunger is intact. The capacity for neural coupling and narrative identity and communal belonging, all of it intact. Your body has not forgotten. It is waiting for you to remember. Tonight, not next week, not after you optimize your sleep stack or finish the self-help book. Tonight. Turn off the overhead light, light something, a candle, a fireplace, even a campfire video with the sound on if that's what you have, and call someone. Or turn to someone who is already there and say these words, "Tell me something real." And then listen, actually listen. The way a person listens when there is nothing else, no phone, no half attention, no simultaneous scroll, just the warm light and the voice and you. You will feel something ancient wake up in you, something that has been waiting quietly for the signal to come home. Because this is what we are, not content consumers, not productivity machines, not individual users to be optimized and monetized and kept engaged. We are the species that survived everything because we sat together in the dark and told each other who we were. That is what we are. It is what we have always been. And it is, I believe, the most important thing we can remember. If this landed, if something in you recognized what I'm describing, don't keep it to yourself. Share this with someone you've been meaning to have a real conversation with, not as content, as an invitation. Tell them, I think we should sit by a fire and talk. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's what humans have always done. Don't stop now.